All right, cool. Well, welcome back everyone to Wisconsin UX Figma tutorial series, walkthrough series. First of all, I just want to say thank you for everyone who came to come check us out as we're in between office moves. So we are a transient company this week, and we're checking out Rise and Grind. So if anyone who isn't familiar, they're like a co-working space and a coffee shop up in the public library in Green Bay that you can check out. So definitely check them out. And thank you for everyone tuning in to the live stream again. We'll also have this up and recorded afterwards. Andrew will be taking any questions in chat, so feel free to just interrupt as we're kind of going. That way we can answer those questions right away. So just as a quick recap of everything we kind of went through, the first series we kind of went through just getting around Figma, getting around the UI. The second one we went out and we built a bunch of different components and stuff like that that we are going to use in our prototype that we're going to go through today. And this one, what we've kind of done is I'm going to go ahead and show what the sort of final output is going to be. So we're going to go through and we're going to show a couple of ways to create prototypes in Figma, and then we're going to talk a little bit afterwards on how we use the prototypes and user testing and different types of interviews that we do in our process. So let me get this bar out of the way here. All right, so this is just the site that we've been designing out, my portfolio. What we've gone and we've built out all these different components. So this is using everything from sort of the UI kit that we designed out. We've gone in and set it up with different hover states and some of these buttons here. So this is going to start to feel a little bit more like a real website as we kind of hover over some of these. Just a simple modal that we can bring up by a simple click into that hover state, closing out of a modal here. Up at the top, some of the menu hover states as well, the ability to switch between the two pages with sort of an instant transition. We'll kind of go over different transitions, and then just a hover state over one of the cards here. So pretty simple prototype in terms of prototypes, but we're going to build this all together. So we'll kind of get an idea of how all this works and kind of show some of the capabilities that everything has. So this is kind of the starting point for our prototype. What I did is I just brought in the main three screens here. So you see we have the contact form or modal, we have the home page, and then we have the showcase image here, or the showcase design here with all the images already populated in there, and that's all driven with the components that we've already built out. So we have our navigation block, our different options in here. We fixed the grid. If everyone is around from last time, it is fixed. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on making this contact form show up over the top of here and adding our little hover state to that contact button. So to get into prototyping into Figma, the nice thing is really you can prototype in any one of your pages by just clicking here over into prototype, and now you've gone into build the prototype mode, and that's off over in the right-hand menu there. One of the nice things about being able to prototype in different pages is when you get really complicated projects, you can prototype out single ideas in a different page when you're working on a single flow, or if you have multiple types of flows or multiple ideas, you can just kind of have them all in this one document. So you can build out a prototype. You don't have to go to a separate tool to build out a prototype. You can just kind of drop it right in the page there. Even if you want to test something out real quick, it's nice to just build out a quick little prototype and try something out. They have a device selector here if you want to anchor it in device. This is something in one of their more recent releases. So we can do iPhone prototypes, iPhone SE, the Google Pixel 2. We're just going to keep it a default web, but that'll essentially put it in a virtual frame for your prototype. You can select your background, and then the most important thing is where does it start? So right now it's set to start on the home page. By default, you can select which one you want here. Also, once we start linking some items up, I'll show you the little player arrow that you can move around. Just choose your different starting spot. So what you could do, and this is like the easiest, simplest prototype, is grab we can grab this button here, we can drag it over to this object here, and now we've created a link. So this is how all the prototyping works, is grabbing an object, dragging over to another object, and grabbing a link. Now I have a bunch of parameters over here. We're not gonna go over those yet. I'm just gonna quickly show what this looks like. So I clicked this and it took me over to here. So basically all that did is switch out these two images, centered them in the middle of the frame. Really no animations, no overlay, anything like that. So that's not what we want to do for this. We want to get a little bit fancier in our simple prototype, and we want to do a hover state first before we have this pop up, but maybe we'll do that first. So what we want to do is I'm going to bring in from our asset library, I'm going to go ahead and bring in our hover state for our button here. And go to design. So this is the hover state button that we made in the previous series. And you see right here, it's set to its deactive state. So in our instance panel, we have hover, normal, and then template. So normal is just the non-active state. We have a click state sort of set in the template, but Figma doesn't really handle click states too well. And most people won't see them, but the hover state they'll definitely notice. So what we're gonna do is we'll grab on this one again, we'll grab our little prototyping connector and drag it down to this button here. And now we have that link there. So now we have a couple of triggers that we can use. So before we just had the default on click, and that's the second I click on it, it's gonna take me right there. We have a couple other options while hovering. So if your mouse is over essentially this frame, you can hover over the, it'll change out what's there while pressing. So if you're pressing down on it, it'll change over. Mouse enter and mouse leave. So you can kind of do some kind of advanced things with mouse entering a frame and mouse leaving a frame, mouse down or mouse up. For this one, we're gonna do while hovering. Since that's, and what it'll do is it'll give us a little indicator of what kind of trigger we're gonna use to transition to our next piece. So our action is go to this hover. Right now we're doing a direct navigate. So while hovering, it's gonna directly navigate to this button. So if I were to go do this prototype again, pretty great hover. So it's gonna go ahead and do that because it really doesn't know what else to do with that. So we don't want that to happen. So we have some other options. We have the ability to swap frames. So on hover, we can swap out the entire frame, or we have the ability to do an open overlay. So a couple of neat instances, and I'll show swapping frames, but we're gonna do open overlay for the first one here. So open overlay allows you to do things like modals or panels or anything that you kind of want to overlay on top of a screen. And we're gonna do it for this hover state because what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna overlay this hover state on top of our existing button just inline so we can kind of get that hover state look there. So you're allowed to have a couple of positions. So you can center align it, your overlay top left or bottom center. So if I go here, so just set to default center, I can hover over and it'll just come into the middle of the screen. So that's a way you could just do a modal on hover, or if you want to do top left, it's going to be over in the top left, kind of snaps up over there if everyone can see that. This is also kind of a nice thing with Figma. For the most part, if you're doing some prototyping, you can keep your prototype player open, make your adjustments, and then just go check them right away in the tab. Or what I'll do is I'll have two windows open, which is kind of nice because then you don't have to constantly reload it. Sometimes it gets a little wonky when you're doing something really complicated changes. But. So for this one, we'll keep it uncentered, but what we're gonna switch it is to manual. So we get all these different options: top left, top center, top right, bottom left, bottom center, bottom right. We're gonna do manual. And what you'll see is manual will automatically place it in the center of whatever frame it was originally over the top of. I can move this around. So if I wanted to have a hover state and the button come over here, I can have it come over there. If I want to put this button over my face, I can do that too. So you can kind of really do whatever you want, but what we're going to do is we're just going to keep it over the center of this button. So essentially what this is sort of acting like is a replace this button, but it's just overlaying that on top of the other one. So now when we go to hover, it's just going to dissolve in up over the top. So it looks like an actual hover state for a website. We have a bunch of options in what we can do. So we can set an overlay background. We're not going to do it for here. We'll do it for when we bring the modal up. But this will darken everything else except for the frame that's being shown over the top. We can also close when clicking on the outside. So this is just clicking on that sort of darkened space. And then we can choose a transition. So right now we're just dissolving it in. Instant is pretty noticeable. It's just a direct swap, no transition between the two. Move in will give you a bunch of different directions. So you can move in from the left, from the right, bottom, top, which is kind of a weird hover state. But I've seen people do kind of funny animations with stuff like that. So we'll just keep it as instant for now, and we'll just leave it at that. All right, so we got our hover state set up. So now we need to be able to click on our button and bring up our modal over the center. So from this button here, now that this is set to be hovering, so as long as our mouse is over the top, that frame is going to be active. So we can also put additional prototyping parameters on the top of that button. So we can go ahead and drag it to here, and we're going to set this to be an on click. So like before, if I leave it to just navigate, it's just going to go to that contact card, but we're going to go ahead and set it to open as an overlay. By default, it's always set to centered. Doesn't always have this 50% opacity set, but kind of works for us. So by default, if I click here, it's going to show up. And by default, it had to click the negative space to close, so I can just click this to close this out. Like we showed before, we can do some interesting things, or you have it down at the bottom. So if you're prototyping out sort of like an email sign-up form that's at the bottom of the screen, you can animate it up like that. But we're going to do, let's keep it at centered, and we can dissolve it in. So it kind of takes a little bit to come in. You can adjust the parameters for the easing as well. So you can set it to ease in and ease out, and ease in and out. And it'll give you, and set the duration, and it'll give you a little preview for all of those actions. So if we have move in, and I set this to a super long time, this is going to be the greatest contact form ever. So, and if you want to take even longer, I guess, yeah, we can do that as well. So, but there, so now we have a hover state and we have our modal set up. Being sort of picky, I'm going to want to go ahead and also make it so we actually click on the button to close out that existing frame there. So I'm going to just duplicate this component here, which already has its little prototyper hooked up to here. So if I try to do anything, it's already got some information about it. To erase that, you can just kind of click off and it'll just go away. So it's a way to just get rid of it. If you copy a bunch of stuff and an array has a bunch of existing stuff linked up into it, you can just kind of drag it off. So for here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set this a link here. We'll set it to open as an overlay, and then we are going to set it to manual, so it's going to go right up over the top, and then we'll leave all the other parameters there. So now when we go to contact, our slow form comes out, we hit close. I didn't change the text, so it still says contact on here, but I can't really do anything else from here, so we still need to make it click back. The nice thing with overlays is they won't lose your base screen is always going to be there. So we've done some pretty complicated overlays with multiple panels and modals and other panels that eventually will close all the way back out to the base screen. So it's kind of nice to have that one-way path work all the way up. Sometimes going back is a little bit difficult when you're using multiple like overlays next to each other and stuff like that. And I'll go through an example, a real ugly one, but I'll kind of show some of that stuff. So we have our button here that we need to change this to say close. And then on click, we just want it to return to this screen here. And what that will do, oh no, we'll reload our prototype since I closed it. So now when I click contact, my modal comes out, I can hit close once it's hovering, and it'll go out. And so those parameters that I'd previously set are still sort of inherited on that close there. So we are gonna adjust that because that's gonna drive me nuts. And then make sure this is what happens when you sloppy copy. Make sure that's all fixed. There, that's much snappier. So then we've created our little loop there. You know, we have our hover state, we brought up a modal, we added an additional hover state, and then we were able to click to the page there. Whenever you're starting to get into more complicated prototypes, one of the nice things in Figma is if you don't click on anything, you'll see the whole network as it kind of connects to everything out. So you can kind of see where everything's going. It does get a little overwhelming if you've got a lot of things going to a lot of different spaces. So it's really nice when you click into a single frame, it'll just show you what interactions are coming to that frame and leaving that frame. And you'll see that in the little arrows as they kind of come out. The lighter blues are what's coming in, and the darker blues are what's coming out or exiting out, or actions that are leaving it. So, all right, so the next thing we have to do is we're gonna do a similar, we're gonna do a similar thing for this home and work up here at the top. So we have our nav bar up top here, and then we have it up here as well, and they're both set as an active work and an active home. What you can do, so now that I showed you kind of the fancy way, what we can also do in the prototypes, and there may be reasons that you want to set up things this way, is essentially build the other screen in the state that you want it to be in instead of using sort of the overlays in the system that way. So for this one, it's a little bit more intense and can slow down a little bit when we're going to do the actual prototype. But if we wanted to set this to hover, keeping home selected, and then go back to our original screen, and then while hovering, have it so it goes to this full screen, we can do that as well, and that should work. Not super useful for this screen because really we're only changing that one tiny little component, but there may be reasons that you do want an entire screen to transition over. You've got a lot of things changing on a click or a hover state instead of doing the overlay. So we're not going to go that way. We're going to go back to, so we want to get our navigation elements here. We'll bring our work screen, our work element in. Drag this up to be a while hovering, set it to centered, or set it to manual. And then when we click on this, we want to go to our work page. Just keep that as an on click. So now, I should be able to hover over work, it'll highlight and click over, and it'll take me to the work page here. So if I don't have any way to get back in the prototype, you are sort of stuck. You can't really click around or do anything. One thing you can do is step through your screens with your arrows. So if you ever get stuck somewhere giving a presentation or anything like that, you can always step through with your arrows. It'll go through, if you have everything in a frame, it'll go through the active frames, which is nice. So we can do the same thing for our home button here. We're gonna have it go to this screen. We're gonna change it to be the word home. we'll set this up as a while hover, and then we already have the click out. One thing that's nice with the while you're in prototyping is they don't take away your ability to make some minor edits, so you can still do text-based edits. So when you're duplicating on a lot of buttons or entire rows, you're able to edit that information and make some changes while you're in the prototyping area. So leave that as instant. And then, so now we should be able to go to work. Yep. We broke that, so we're going here. Did not have it set to manual. There we go. So now we can go work, we can go home, and we can click back between both of these. They both have a hover state. Our button has a hover state. All right, so the last thing that we'll go ahead and just for this simple prototype, and then we'll kind of show some of the more complicated things that you can do, is we'll go in and add this showcase image here. And same thing before, you can set up all your images down below, really know best practice on how to put this stuff in there. I tend to keep most of the stuff either off to the side or right above it or close to where it's going, because I'm not a huge fan of all the overlapping lines that you can kind of get all over the place. So we set this to while hovering and then set it to manual replace. And then this doesn't really click anywhere, so that we can just keep it like that. And I keep closing my prototype window. So now we go to work, you can have that hover state over there. So, any questions before we go try some interesting stuff? No? All right, cool. All right, so like I said, you can kind of do some really interesting things with the prototyping tools in here. So I'm gonna just create this real quick. So let's say when we click on a portfolio piece, we wanna have like the actual portfolio come out as a panel, which is gonna be like half the screen size here, a giant red block in it. Turn that into our portfolio panel. So from this block, while it's hovering, we can go ahead and set a click on that. And we made this take up the entire, it's the same height as our viewport for this web prototype. And we're gonna wanna set it to come in from the top, or anchor to the top left. So this is the anchored position. And then we want it to move in. So when we click on this, we want it to move in, come from the top left, and we'll go ahead and set an overlay background on it. So I click on this, went all the way to the top left, because that's where I had the original panel originating, was from that side. So, and I have it moving in from this direction. So if I move it in from this direction, it'll come in from the other side. But you know what, we're gonna switch it to top right. And I close my window again. So now we have the little overlay over the top, and then we can have this kind of show up over here and put some more information in here. We don't have any way to get out of it right now, so we'll just leave it like that. And when we click on the red box, we're just gonna return back to this main thing here. It's just a quick out. So I can hover over, I can bring this out, and I can click out. So now, portfolio or a case study might be really long, right? We might have a ton of information here, a whole bunch of written copy, links to other things, all kinds of stuff in there. So in the frame here, we just have this shape here as our background, and then this one red box. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna group that into a frame. I'm just gonna duplicate it out. And then make this into a new frame, and we're gonna call this actual case study. So in the actual case study, We're gonna go ahead and make it a lot longer. We're gonna get rid of this background because we are going to set an actual background on here of this color. And then we're gonna go, that's gonna take forever. Get some words, got more pictures, right? Super long case study called actual case study. So if this was, let's say in my sort of UI kit, if this was a template that I built out, I filled it out with all the appropriate content. I want to bring it in on this panel when we click onto this image. I want this panel to slide out using that case study that I just created. So I'll delete out this red block here. Bring in my instance of my component here. And so what I did is I took this frame called portfolio panel and I dropped in this component that I just made into it. Right now, we don't have clip content set on, so it's showing everything that's extending beyond, but for this example, I'm gonna go ahead and clip the content so it fits into what this sort of panel container is. I'm gonna go back to the prototype. So when we click on here, it's gonna come here. And then when I click on this red one, we wanna go back here. But we have information that's below this frame. So we wanna be able to scroll down and see that stuff in our prototype. So what you'll see is if you click on a frame, you have overflow behavior. You can set it to do different scrolling methods. So there's a horizontal scroll. I don't have any information horizontally, so it's going to give me a warning and say we can't scroll it because it's exactly the same size as the frame. We have vertical scroll, and we have horizontal and vertical scrolling. So we're going to go with vertical scroll. So when we go back to our prototype, and I click here and I bring it out, I will now be able to scroll over this panel here and be able to get to the information down below. If you had scrolling on the background here, it'll stop the capabilities of this background image scrolling and only be able to scroll on what's active. So it's kind of nice when you're setting up more complicated prototypes. So let's say we want to get real crazy with our portfolio panel, and we actually want another panel to come out. Let's do 720. When we click on our blue image, and we'll set this whole thing to that same color blue. So now we have our panel 2 here. And we're going to go ahead and create another frame, which will be our second portfolio panel. And we're going to call this Folio Showcase. So if we had a giant image here. So we kind of showed how we can use the overlays to actually overlay on top of things and how you can use overlays to kind of move things around. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to set it up. So when we click on this blue thing, we're going to bring up this portfolio showcase. One thing I could do is I could just swap out this panel. So for example, if you had multiple images that or multiple screen designs that needed to change the entire thing and click this, it's just going to swap that out. It's not using an overlay, it's just doing a direct swap to that. But what we're going to do for this one is instead of swap, we are going to set it up as another overlay, and we're going to set it to manual, but this time we're going to set it to come over the side like this and then move in. So what that'll do is now we'll be able to set up a multi-panel slide. So we can have another panel come in. Go back here. And then let me All right, it's going above it for some reason. We can also set it to come in from other directions if we wanted to, just like we kind of showed before. Go back to the prototyping tool. And then if I want to come from the bottom, we can do that as well. So we can kind of do some interesting combinations of screens and overlays as we start to prototype this out. We don't have a color set over here. If we wanted to do a darken the screen as well, we can do that as well and then click off of it. All right, cool. Any questions on anything with prototyping? Connecting screens together? No? All right, cool. So what do you kind of do once your prototype is done? Has anyone here delivered prototypes before to anybody? Like using something like InVision, Principle, what else is out there? Prototyping, paper prototyping. Has anyone used that app where you could take pictures of like your sketches and then link them all up using some tools? That's kind of a neat prototyping tool. So a lot of the times we'll end up using prototypes not only to inform the dev team of how something comes together, but really to get feedback from users. So the nice thing with Figma is you're able to share out this prototype link with users, and they can still directly leave comments as they're going through the prototyping tool. So they can actually click through, drop comments right in line as they're using it, which is really nice. But the biggest thing that we use it for is usability testing or observation studies. We've used it before on like usertesting.com, where we actually get to watch a recording of users go through it and click through it, or we'll actually sit down and have that meeting with different users and kind of go through the prototype with them. Usually what we try to do is even in like presentations to clients and everything like that, the idea is to let the client drive the prototype or let the user drive the prototype, because you know all the quirks, so you know how to get through things. So it's really nice to allow them to sort of drive through the prototype and sort of see the flaws, and you can kind of see where they're going and what they're thinking. When we get into sort of like the user testing side of things, so that's like the biggest thing that we use it for, is testing the usability of our overall designs. And we do a lot of that over the web. So Figma is really nice. Everything's online. We don't have to send somebody somewhere else. We can do it right in Figma. If somebody gets stuck, we can do a hot fix, which we've had to do before. Someone got stuck, and like, hold on, let me go fix that real quick. And we kind of go through an entire process with our users. When we're doing the user testing, what we do is first of all, we'll vet out what we're trying to test out. So for this portfolio, I don't really know what we would test out besides, does this look cool? Would you hire me? But on our more complicated solutions, we really want to come to our user test with sort of an objective in mind. So we might have a prototype that's a very linear path, and we want them to hit all the dead ends, because that'll show us that our optimal path isn't as great as we thought it was, or they're thinking something else. So we'll create out that optimal path in whatever software we're trying to have them test out a specific flow. When we do that, we'll sit down with them ahead of time. We usually will create a small interview script, ask some questions, kind of get an idea of their role, what are they currently doing. If we're building, if we're changing like an existing workflow to a new workflow, we'll kind of ask them like ahead of time, like, what are some of the problems or issues with what you're currently doing? Could you kind of explain what your role is? Could you explain a little bit of detail on your day-to-day life in your current software? And then we won't walk them through our new prototype. What we'll do is say, hey, we have a new static prototype. We'll kind of explain to them it's not real software. Some people will think that. They'll think like, oh, it's a real website, and they want it to work like a website, and they'll start clicking into input fields, and they're like, I can't do that. So kind of talk them through just the sort of the quirks of prototyping tools. It's static images. You're going to click through and experience certain things you can't do. People will still try to click on input fields. It's just everyone's habit. And we'll just kind of set them at a task at hand. So we really will go at it with an objective and have them kind of walk through. It's like, hey, let's say you're working for a charity organization. We built out a new donation portal for you, and we want you to go in and manage, see all the donations you received, and then allocate them accordingly. Or make sure that they're being allocated accordingly, or someone had a question about their receipt. How would we go about answering that? So we'd go ahead and set them up with that scenario and say, try to do your job with this new software or this new design. And as they're kind of walking through it, we usually will have two people doing the user test, one person to help kind of guide them along, ask maybe some leading questions along the way. Why did you click on that? Or what were you thinking when you went over here? Or where do you think you would go to do what the tasks that we assigned you to? And somebody else to really just type those notes out and start to really observe and really write a bunch of things that whoever's doing the interview isn't going to catch. Good thing with a lot of the modern tools like Zoom is you're able to record your user interviews, which are super beneficial to have people who may not be able to be there watch them afterwards, and to be able to do some comparisons. If you have some design changes and then you have someone else test it out, you can watch side by side and see what were people going when they went through it, and then you can listen to all the audio so you can hear the interview as everyone's kind of going through it. Once the interview's done and they kind of go through it, it's sort of a big thing. Well, during the interview, it's a really big thing to let your user know that you're not testing them, because they're going to feel, if they can't get something to work, they're going to feel really bad. So even though like we designed a lot of the software, we tell people, hey, we didn't design this, it's not us, so don't feel bad. If you don't like it or if you get stuck, it's just bad design. We'll make sure we get it fixed for the next time, just to kind of alleviate some of that stress and pressure that they may have as we're kind of going through it. Then, like I said, they're going to get stuck. There might be some roadblocks, and kind of coach them through it or help them through that. And then at the end, after everything's done, kind of get that initial reaction, kind of when they're coming off of that like interview high. Hey, what did you think? What was one thing that stood out to you? What's one thing that you really didn't like? What's one thing that you thought could have been improved? How did you feel about a certain thing? You can sort of ask specific questions on the scenario that you had them go after. I'm trying to think. And then really at the end, you want to debrief with whoever was taking your notes, or if you had a team of people observing, is sitting down and kind of go back and collect everyone's thoughts and kind of get together and kind of go over what are the notes that we had, what did we think, what could we have changed. People start thinking of solutions right in the interview as they're taking notes. We use Notion for a lot of our design notes. A lot of stuff is right in there. So that's one way we use prototyping a lot, just for testing and validating out our design. A lot of times we'll use it also for presenting, here's a solution to a group of people, as like, this is what it's going to be, and it's more presentational. And that way you can actually do some kind of interesting things where you can almost treat it like a PowerPoint. So what we will do is you can create sort of titles in your page that start off, that can start off an entire prototyping flow. This blue on blue is really hard to see. Right, so you can make a table of contexts, and each one of these can lead to different prototypes, different scenarios, and you can kind of click through those and have this be your start frame, and then halfway through a prototype, you could drop out into another frame that is just some images, and hey, this is the solution we were at. So you can kind of use this as a presentation tool. So it's really kind of cool on how you can use Figma to do like half prototype, half PowerPoint presentation all right in here, and you can share it amongst an entire organization. They can leave comments and kind of click through and experience them themselves, or you can guide them through it. A couple of other, I've seen people do animated videos with the prototyping tool. It's really interesting with 5 people all in one thing, and they're all clicking on things, and it's like a race car driving across. So like, the prototyping tool is really, really powerful, and they keep adding more stuff. I'm not sure. I don't know if testing on devices is on their roadmap yet. I forget.
They have Figma mirror.
Yeah.
It's not, can't really install anything like Envision, with the Envision prototypes, you can download those on your device and then test it or have it send a link to someone. They don't really have that capability yet, so we still use Envision for a lot of our prototyping. If we're going to engage users that aren't with us, we'll make sure that they get the download.
Yeah. Any questions or any?
A question on
Yeah.
the sharing link. Are there restrictions on, in order to open it, someone would have, like the client would have to have Figma installed? And you mentioned with leaving comments, how much control does someone have over the prototype when you send them the link?
So there's can comment and can edit sort of permission level. So can comment can only leave comments. And if you share them the link of the prototype, they'll only have access to the prototype. They won't be able to get into the actual design screens. So everyone who can view can leave comments. So that sort of view permission. And they can click through. They can't change anything. I think they can see each other's comments. Yeah, so like other viewers could see other comments. So if we were to do sort of a user test where we're not doing an interview and we're not going to watch it or do it live and we're going to send it to people and say leave comments as you go, we may do it, duplicate out a bunch of files, or send, so everyone has their own unique link, or send it out, gather the comments off the page, and then send it back out, because we wouldn't want anyone to sort of tarnish anyone else's opinion or influence anybody.
So does Figma have any features to kind of bridge the gap between the design and the dev team? I saw some CSS, it kind of spits out some CSS when you click on a component, but does it have any other tools like that?
This is about as far as it goes in Figma itself, but there is, what was that tool I sent you last week? There is sort of what's that?
The tool that's kind of like Zephyr.
It's like a more advanced design system tool that actually you can take and embed. So every item is its own frame, essentially, even if you don't make it a frame. And you can embed individual items into that tool. It'll give it a page. You can make collections. So like, here's all your buttons, and they'll pull out all the CSS details, and you can leave developer notes in it. I'll find it after this, and I'll send you the link to it.
One of the other things that's really cool is Figma has an open API, so you can actually code a React component and reference that API, and then it can change the design file in Figma. It'll update in real time in your React app. So if you had colors and color palettes and things like that you want to customize, or really anything, you can just update Figma and it would update the React API. I think there's the side scroller game.
Oh yeah.
Where somebody made a game that's React, but it fires back to Figma, and you can change characters and layouts and stuff like that in real time, and it'll update in the app. So that it's pretty cool.
I don't know if you have time to go through it. This is show the drop-down trick for doing drop-downs.
What?
For doing complicated drop-downs. I have to make a whole drop-down thing. All right, 20 minutes. Let's go.
Let's see how fast you are.
Oh no, on the clock. Yeah, so one thing that's kind of nice with the replace feature is we can do sort of, I don't know, I think it's kind of neat, and I wish I would have prepared for this because I think it's kind of some of the advanced things that Figma allows you to do. So this is going to be super sloppy, so everyone please don't judge my organizational skills on this. All right, so let me see, what do we have here? So when making a dropdown, and this is not necessarily, this is just one way to do it. Is you don't have to have items always set in the frame that, like they don't have to be in the frame. So you can kind of do some interesting things with just the overlaying of objects based on the way you have things set up. So if we created this as a component, I bring all these in here. So I have it set to clip, right? So everything's gonna get clipped out of here as I normally would. I have my drop text here for different line items. So what I wanna do is, so that's my template. I'm gonna make this into a new frame or a new component. We're gonna call this drop down in active. And then we're gonna call this next one, drop down active, and we're going to create this into a component. We're going to create this into a component. And inactive, we are going to just hide these. So now I've got my two different states built out. Just in my single component. So what we may do is build out like a really robust template that can have up to 10 different drop-down items in it, and then we'll only turn on and off what we need. So then when we go to our prototype, so I got my drop-down inactive here. I can drag that up here for duplication, set this to be active. And just like we did before, on click, we can do a manual override. And if you're just line it up over the top. That'd probably help if it was in the frame, huh? And not just floating in space. So now I'll have this drop down on click that actually can overlay any object as long as it's high enough in the hierarchy. So if I set this up over here and go back. So before, like the old, so it can drop down over the top of things. So it's just a way that you don't have to have things in the actual frame. So if you turn that clipping off, you can kind of do some really interesting things with drop downs or different menu items that kind of do overlays by just doing that replace. So you don't have to build out an entire block that is like, here's my drop down condensed, then here's my drop down expanded. Another way to do this same thing is nope, that's not what I want to do. Is you can just do the menu as well as its own frame. And then so when you click on here, instead of bringing out that whole object, why won't you let me link? Oh. And then it's a little bit more work, but you have to manually align it. So if you had a bunch of components with different drop-down menus, you can set those up at the top and kind of just drop them in over the top. And as long as this is still above everything else, it should work. Yeah, so same result, just setting it up as a different menu item. A little bit more flexible if it's just a menu item, so. I don't know if I have any more interesting tricks. That might be it. What's that?
Like input type and our selection for user.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, everyone online.